one of the things you should never do in life is kind of like hold on to, the idea of like having heroes, essentially. And, not heroes, but just people you look up to and respect. Because over time, they will fundamentally change. And so one of two things will happen. Either they'll change drastically and become a more disappointing version of themselves when they eventually lose that spark that made them unique or interesting in the first place. That's just a universal rule, as summed up in the novel Trainspotting by Sick Boy, as having it and then not having it. And that's all life is. You build up to a point where you have it for a undetermined, unspecified amount of time, and then you lose it and you can never get it back. That's Sick Boy's theory of living. And it's true. But anyway, back when I was a kid, and you have to understand, I was fascinated by computers and always had been from a very early age. I was like super into it. As a kid that lived on a very rough estate, it wasn't an option really for me because my father was in prison and therefore there was nobody that could fight my battles for me. And some of these battles were unwinnable. I spent a lot of time indoors because it wasn't safe to leave the house for anybody that wasn't physically capable of defending themselves or having somebody that would be willing to do it on your behalf. Computers basically became sort of a window into a world that was certainly more pleasant than the one that was outside my window. I always used to work and save up the money to get whatever the latest one was. I was back playing. My first ever computer was a Spectrum 48K. I remember one time, when I got very sick as a kid and had to spend some time in hospital. We all used to huddle around the BBC Micro and the kids would and play Tarzan. I've always been big up on computers all my life. And so when it sort of started coming through into mainstream culture, and they started making TV programming around it, I was obviously fascinated. And the show that you absolutely had to watch as a kid, if you were cool, you'd get out of school, you'd go home. You'd watch you'd get home by about, just before 5, between 4:30 and 5. You'd catch the back end of the kids' programming, maybe a cartoon, Ninja Turtles, something like that. Then it would go into News Round, Home and Away, Neighbours, and then at 6 you would put on Channel 4, and that's when all the counterculture programming would sort of begin on Channel 4. And so 6 o'clock, Channel 4, we used to have Games Master. Right? And Games Master was one of the first ever mainstream programs about games. It's just batshit insane as a concept. What it was essentially esports, I suppose you could say. It would be 3 challenges over, either head-to-head or, beating a high score or something like that. The kids had come on to prove that they could do something. They were the Games Master, would be on different games, and it would be presided over by Sir Patrick Moore, now sadly deceased, who I had the pleasure of meeting once, and I did call him Games Master to his face in Cambridge. But obviously he's a renowned astrophysicist, and he was like a sort of guest lecturer or whatever. But for me, I met him through Games Master, not Sky at Night, which was the program he used to do on BBC, which was also good. He was sort of like our Carl Sagan in a way, I suppose. It was his floating head with very early CGI, and you could go on as a kid from the general public and ask Patrick Moore, a man who probably knew nothing about video games, for a cheat code in your game. And you would go, Games Master, I am stuck on level 5 of, Sonic Legends, and Games Master would tell you how to beat the game. So the host of that was Dominik Diamond, and Dominik Diamond was kind of, to a teenager, Dominik Diamond was kind of like a cool, edgy figure. He'd come out in his leather jacket. He had spiky red hair. He was Scottish. He talked with an accent. Still in these days, accents on TV were still pretty rare. We hadn't had what I call the Big Brother revolution. That was much later. Once Big Brother had that fake, over-the-top Geordie guy doing the Spencer's in the fucking diary room. Like once they'd done that, suddenly regional accents were cool, and that was all you heard on programming. But anyway, Dominik Diamond was sort of like this, eclectic. He, kind of like crazy guy who would come out and he would talk to the kids. He would, if they were bad, he would call them shit. You know, he would say that was terrible. You've embarrassed yourself and all of this, as they were like vying to get like the Games Master Golden Joystick or whatever it was. And he was just sort of a, a fun guy, and a guy who obviously, by the way, knew about video games. He wasn't phoning it in. He wasn't faking it. He was a gamer. He liked games. Anyway, he's got old now. His desperate grasping at fucking relevance is just sad. Just sad to see my beloved Dominik Diamond in the state he's in. He's a games columnist over at The Guardian occasionally now. And just to show you how far from relevance he is, he wrote a recent column about the ending of The Last of Us, not The Last of Us 2. It's like he's finally got round. Like, I've got a backlog of games, right? But 10 years, like at 10 years, you just have to put a pin in it, don't you? Like it's like this is all talked out now, Dominik. So anyway, and he says, who wants to talk about that ending? Well, everyone's talked about it, Dominik. We've talked about it to fucking death. We're even past talking about the ending of the sequel by now. So who wants to talk about it? Anyone who did has. What unique perspective are you going to offer? Well, you know, here it is. Urged on by his millennial daughter, right? It's already terrible. Because that's the other thing. He's turned into one of those, they were kind of like, yeah, cool guys, want to be rock, edgy people who have kids and then just turn into a pussy and then never shut the fuck up about their kids. Which, I've got friends like that in real life. Nauseates me, of course. Those breeders, it's just sad, because you remember them when they used to say to you in a bar, I'm never having fucking kids with me, like, fuck this planet, fuck that. And then when I've got kids, best thing that ever happened, Rich, best thing. Love them. That's all I do now. Yeah, just spend all my time thinking about my kids. Yeah, totally. Oh, you know where I was the other night? Somewhere with my kids. You know what I did? You know what I'm doing tomorrow? Doing something with the kids. Can't come out this weekend. Why? Kids. Which sounded a lot like Prince Andrew's defense. Anyway, the point being, I just find it immensely boring. Just like to constantly and it's worse in the media, because what people do, they make their kids vehicles for the what they want to talk about. You'll have seen this quite a bit, I'm sure, with the phenomenon on Twitter of my 6-year-old turned to me and said, now that the orange man has gone, are the children free from the cages? And I said yes, and we hugged and cried. People do that. I saw there was like one guy on Twitter, I've got it bookmarked still. It's one of the most ridiculous and embarrassing things I've ever seen. Some shit author, right? Like, not a best-selling author, you understand. Like, just some guy who had a book in print and fucking sold a few copies, who just so happened coincidentally to have another book out, which he plugged immediately after his tweet went viral. Basically uploaded a picture of his alleged daughter's essay, like article, saying that why collective punishment is wrong. And what he'd done is he'd written in really shit handwriting that was so comically bad for someone of his daughter's age, by the way. Because that's the other thing. They're like, oh, I mustn't get found out. How do kids write again? And he'd said that collective punishment is against the Geneva Convention. Just normal, healthy 6-year-old things, right? Just like, oh my God. Just fucking pathetic, isn't it? So anyway, people in the media use their kids constantly as a vehicle. It's just like the most tedious trope of all. So anyway, urged on by his millennial daughter, Dominik Diamond is only 8 or so years late to this particular party and finds that an ending can really make or break a game. So the setup is out of the blue. My daughter said to me, this game is an incredible essay on the effects of grief and grey morality in a post-apocalyptic society. It's got proper female characters and progressive takes on sexuality and tons of rain. They've made a video game of The Handmaid's Tale, he says. A book I'm sure he's never read. As a Scottish working class guy, but okay. No, Dad. It's The Last of Us. Don't worry, it's still a zombie shooter. And both games have the best ending ever. Now she has my interest. Video game endings fascinate me because my generation started out with arcade games that didn't have them. Pac-Man kept eating dots and chasing ghosts, and the Space Invaders kept coming, wave after incessant wave. The first arcade game that had an actual ending was Dragon's Lair, and nobody actually saw that because it was so hard to complete. I have a tough start with The Last of Us because I hate games where you search for stuff in every room of a house. I spend my normal life doing that with car keys and headphones. I want games where you walk into a room and all the objects get sucked into a magic pocket. But that isn't realistic, I hear you cry. Well, neither is only being able to carry 3 shivs in a world where, despite the zombie apocalypse, cargo pants still clearly exist. As you all know by now, and if you've yet to play The Last of Us, then please stop reading. Spoilers on an 8-year-old game. Spoiler culture. The worst thing, right? The ending has Joel murder a perfectly innocent and well-intentioned doctor who wants to cut Ellie open to find a cure that will save humanity. But Joel has no truck with utilitarian philosophy because Ellie has now become a replacement for the daughter he lost. So he disregards mankind's future and, by stopping the operation, effectively murders the entire human race alongside a whole hospital's worth of doctors. Why does he do that? I asked the millennial in one of the many fantastic discussions we've had about the game. Because he's a white male. Because he's a white male, came the answer. Because it's 2022 and she's in her 20s. And maybe she's right. So, right, there's, what is it the woke fuckers say? A lot to unpack. Haha, I'm using coded language to show you I'm one of the good guys. So, first of all, I guess, let's go into the sort of, like, the staggering amount of oversight on the story itself. Because this is interesting, because I often hear people say this about The Last of Us. You know, oh, Joel has essentially doomed mankind by not allowing them to operate on Ellie. And the thing is, obviously, anyone who's actually played the game knows this, because as you go through, there's lots of storytelling vehicles, you know, all the typical ones. You read notes, you know, you find notes, people write shit on walls. Typically, you listen to voice recordings. Obviously, there's a huge aspersion cast on the ability of the doctor to even synthesize the vaccine, right? It's explicitly stated multiple times that actually this person isn't that competent and that they have failed in the past and that actually, you know, this is just another roll of the dice, essentially. So you have to understand that it's kind of one of these interesting things where I don't want to get into the whole fucking overused Ludo narrative dissonance thing, but we know that as the player, and there's nothing in a cutscene, there's no line of dialogue in the game that lets us know Joel, the character, knows that. So does he know what we know? Or do we know something and that's meant to inform our decisions or how we process the decision? You know, it's one of those things. I don't want to get into that, but it's why games are really interesting as an art form, isn't it? So anyway, so that's point number one, you know, and I think that's important because essentially it does give you permission to sort of do what you end up doing. Second, I think the game would have been improved to a certain degree if it had a double ending. One where you could choose to sacrifice Ellie, essentially. Doesn't have to be canon, but that's not what Naughty Dog games do. Naughty Dog games aren't about branching storylines. They want to tell you a specific story, and they tell you the story that they write, and you essentially do things in between, but it's just to draw you into that one story. The story is essentially on rails. It's kind of like an interactive movie, although that term doesn't really sort of do it justice. But second of all, they're not all entirely innocent there. Now, I know, canonically, again, with The Last of Us 2, yes, that doctor wasn't a particularly bad person. But this was all being set up by, essentially, a terrorist group, a terrorist resistance organization that had engaged in some pretty fucking gnarly stuff, all in the, thought process of trying to bring us back to civilization. Which also, third point, something I always thought about, How do we know that it's not so much about wanting to save Ellie, which it is, but it's also very much about thinking, why would I want to save humanity and have it rebuilt from this point where it is, with the assumption being that it will go back to what it was before, which wasn't particularly great. Remember, the previous iteration of humanity is indeed the one that got Joel's daughter murked with a fucking machine gun. So probably has some, not so great thoughts about society. Not to mention loads of inferences about how he's had a pretty dysfunctional life prior to that. A divorce, a separation, who knows what else. Fourth point, the whole narrative arc is essentially about what are we willing to do to sort of, what lengths will we go to for people we love and care about? How far will you take it if you get a second chance? Because the thing people don't really talk a lot about is that this isn't just Joel finding a surrogate daughter. It is a do-over for the thing that creates the Joel we play as in the game. Narratively, he failed. It's a common thought process. If you're a parent and you lose a child, you are haunted by the failure of that. And so it's not just that she's a surrogate daughter. She is a surrogate daughter who is in immediate peril for her life. Joel can't fail again. It's not optional. He's not going to lose another child, and double down on that failure that's absolutely haunted him for 25 years or whatever it was. So obviously, what you're supposed to do is fucking do this. And as I said, when I've talked about my playthrough on stream before, at the end, I didn't give a fuck. Our country roads, I killed them all. With her on the back seat, wouldn't give a fuck. Would do it again. Would never. If there was a second ending in the game, I would just never do that playthrough. I would never play it. Would never play it, right? Because why would I? Why would I not save my surrogate daughter from anything? What parent couldn't identify with that? You don't have to be a breeder to understand that thing that we will do anything to protect our kids. Heinous, horrible, yes, but contextually, in the moment, through a parent's eyes, always justifiable. And then the fifth point, that throwaway glib line, which, by the way, also didn't happen. About Joel being a white male. The reason why there was kind of a lot of pushback to where the story went in the sequel is because it did introduce aspects of that and kind of held Joel up to be an almost pitiable, lonely, selfish, arrogant. They introduced elements into his personality that weren't there in the first game. They created tensions that didn't exist in the first game, and that's fine. I actually don't have any problem with Joel getting murked. I don't mind that they did that, right? Although it's just death has to mean something, and this is another aspect to this. Ellie's death would have essentially, what we can infer from playing the game, it would have been meaningless, and it would have utterly crushed and destroyed the protagonist's soul. And you remember, we play as him and her, but mostly as him, right? He's us. He's our avatar in the game. Why would we endure that? Why would we put that on ourselves? Why would we want the sad ending, essentially, when the game asks you to insert yourself into that position? And in that sense, no, Joel is not a white male. And indeed, a lot of protagonists, unless that is a specific signifier for the story the game wants to explore, it's irrelevant. Because I've got, friends, women who've played through this game and loved it and feel exactly the same way I do about it. Kill them all. Obviously, because it's about something transcendent to something that feeble. That he's a white male, and white males want to get it all their own way, just like they have done in society for hundreds of years. It's not about that. It's just about parental love, and that's maternal, that's paternal, that transcends everything, doesn't it? That's the thing of the whole thing. There's even, if you think about it thematically throughout the game, there's so many explorations of relationships, the complexity of family, and I haven't played it in a long time. But think about the relationship between Joel and his brother and how that's broke down, and he's moving on, and he's got a wife now, and they're kind of estranged, and they can't really get along with each other. Think about the dude in the fucking booby trap town who ends up, finding out that his boyfriend, you find out, because you have to look around and find things, but essentially he's a gay character, and him and his boyfriend are having some spat, and his boyfriend wants to take off and tries to steal his car battery and leave him, and he gets bitten and he hangs himself. And that scene where he finds him there, and because he can't let anybody know about what was really going on in their relationship, he's closeted in the apocalypse. Think about that as a statement that even when the world has ended, gay men have to still hide that aspect of themselves. That's a powerful fucking message, by the way. And so you only find out by a throwaway line after the fact unless you've been paying attention. So there's so much commentary around relationships and what we're willing to do for the people we care about. Again, think about the family they meet where the kid gets bit and turns, and the big brother just murks himself. He can't live with the fact that he's, this is the horror of losing loved ones. And it's a mirror to Joel's grief at the fucking start of the game. They lose loved ones. He sees it again, time and time again. That wound, in his psyche, he can never, he can't get away from it. It's just the reality. So when he's presented with this opportunity, is he going to be a failure like that guy? No, he's not. He's going to fucking kill them all. He's going to kill everyone he has to. He will not go through that again. It's got nothing to do with any identity politics, got nothing to do with any of that shit. It's just, what will you do for someone you care about? How far will you go? If you just boil it down to what the story is. Anyway, back to Dominik Diamond, because now he starts talking about the sequel. So when it came to The Last of Us Part 2, I was beyond excited. 50 million hours later, I was beyond disappointed. Don't get me wrong, the millennial nailed it when she said it was a great exploration of the effects of grief and grey morality. But after spending the whole game switching between two strong female characters and contrasting factional creeds, you have the final confrontation. They fight and they both live and go their separate ways. The only real damage is Ellie losing a couple of fingers, and the game portrays the worst consequence of this as not being able to play guitar anymore. Seriously, that's the biggest drawback to being fingerless in a zombie apocalypse. The first game ended with Joel murdering an entire civilization. The second ends with Ellie murdering one song on a guitar. So, once again, staggeringly misses the point. This is one of the things, people really struggle with metaphor and allegory in media in general. It's like, I remember, what's that film? Annihilation, if you've seen that. It's the one about, it's got Natalie Portman in it, and her husband is in the military, and anyway, something alien is happening called the Shimmer. It's this weird, anomaly, and a bunch of soldiers go in, and they don't come out, and her husband was one of them, and he dies in, it looks like he's got a disease or an illness or something, and he dies, and then she has to go into the Shimmer with a team of women who are all got their own little motivations for being there, and they go into the Shimmer to find out what the fuck's going on, and one by one, things happen, right? I don't want to spoil it for you, but the problem is Annihilation is not a movie to be taken literally. And people, there's so much terrible film critique on YouTube and where people just look at it literally. And it's like, is Natalie Portman the alien at the end of Annihilation? It's not about that. The movie's not about that. That is the vehicle through which to explore grief, relationships, breakups, whatever, right? How these things change you, how grief changes you. That's what that film is about, right? And each person has sort of a different approach to it, and that's what you're supposed to be focused. It doesn't matter if she's an alien or not at the end. That's not the message that the film's trying to tell. Unfortunately, people look at things literally, and this isn't even a sort of intelligent, this isn't complex. So the loss of the fingers and not being able to play guitar is a literal and metaphorical severance. Joel got her the guitar. Joel never said he wouldn't play guitar because he used to do it for his daughter and he couldn't bring himself to do it again. And then he actually plays for Ellie in a heartfelt moment that shows he's actually getting comfortable in this new world and sort of leaning back to becoming the less harsh interpretation of himself that he had to be to survive. And then she's learning guitar, and it's this shared thing. Also, it's kind of implied it's a shared thing she sort of does a little bit reluctantly just to appease him, just so they can have a connection because of the fundamental distrust that's been sown between them, predicated on the lie that, no, they actually couldn't make a vaccine from your brain. So when she can't play guitar at the end, that's not what's bad. That's fine. It's that she's no longer connected to Joel. This thing that connected them can no longer be pursued. She puts it down and walks away. Joel, for good or ill, is now no longer part of her life. They cannot be connected. Also, by the way, a mirror to the fact that, unlike Joel, she didn't take the vengeful path. How can you miss that? Like, how can you be a critic of media and miss that? I am not, by any stretch of the imagination, a smart person. But I am a media student. So maybe I have a head start on these things. Or maybe it's just so fucking obvious. The Last of Us Part 2 leaves us with exactly the same non-ending. Oh, by the way, he even says that scene where you can't play guitar is hilarious. And so proving he really doesn't understand the significance of the scene. And then goes, The Last of Us Part 2 leaves us with exactly the same non-ending as those original arcade games. Ellie and Abby will go on killing to keep their respective post-apocalyptic factions going, both driven by the grief of murdered loved ones. They are both trapped, endlessly chasing ghosts. No, 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 that's not what's happened, Dominik. That isn't what's happened. That isn't what's happened. In fact, it is now implied, actually, that the violence is being walked away from. That's the whole point of sparing your mortal enemy. She's gone all this way across America to find her, to kill her, and then in the last moment decides to spare her. Realizing that actually vengeance is a circle. That's what essentially got Joel killed. And that if she doesn't break that cycle, it will continue. She also is empathetic because the person that she wants to take vengeance on has been horrifically tortured and degraded by even worse people just prior to it. So, no, they're not going to continue. I'm sure as well, I know we don't really care much about Abby, but I'm pretty sure she's going to be forever changed by her experiences as well, which another way the game fails is that it doesn't explore that at the end. Like, you play as Abby in the game, and listen, you might not give a fuck about that character. Fine, I totally get that. But, just tie off the story at least. You know what I mean? I want a satisfying resolution at least. The game's fucking takes ages. It's like a 100-hour game, you know what I mean? Give me a conclusion for all of the story arcs. They didn't. And then get this. The Millennial says this shows there are no winners when it comes to revenge. I say they want both protagonists alive for The Last of Us 3. It's a cynical cop-out. But then, by the way, if that was a driving force, like we need to keep characters alive with plot armor so we can sell more sequels, you just don't kill Joel because he sells the game. You know, I don't know how many people will be coming back for Last of Us 3, frankly. And I've done videos on that. I was covering the original leaks when it all happened, and I said, it's going to be a disaster. It's going to be bad. And it was. It was an objectively, narratively bad game. And when you consider Naughty Dog's games are just interactive narratives, that's bad. that's a very bad thing. Anyway, but then The Last of Us Part 2 is a game that features the most cynical scene ever. This is Dominik Diamond's most cynical scene ever, where apropos of nothing, after genuinely bravura portrayals of women, transgender, and gay characters, alpha female Abby suddenly gets rogered from behind by some guy. It happens out of nowhere. It definitely... Right, so First of all, that guy is a major important character, right? It's not some guy, is it? It's like a person who's essential to the story. Also, their love was unrequited. They couldn't get it together. And then they had things to do, and he got with someone else, and there was all this tension between them. And they even talk prior to this about their, on-off states of their relationship. It doesn't come out. It absolutely doesn't come out of nowhere. If anything, it's telegraphed as fuck. And then, don't get me wrong. Credit for him bringing the phrase "Rogered from behind" back from the dead. I think last time I heard that, it was in a copy of Viz, and also the idea that. I know that sex scene spawned a million memes, and the lie that it was the Druckmann insert that actually did the sex when it wasn't. I didn't hate it within the context of I hate the story overall, but within the context of the story they were telling, I don't think it was that bad. It's just the fact that it leads to a bunch of high school bullshit afterwards. Again, like, people just aren't going to give a fuck about this in the apocalypse. Like, 1 minute it's fucking Night of the Living Dead, the next minute it's Dawson's fucking Creek. It's just... tonally, it was a mess. And then he says this: "It's easily the most gratuitous bit of nudity I have ever seen in games, and I have played The Witcher 3. Right? Now, far be it from me to remind everybody that in Witcher 1, to unlock an achievement, you had to have sex with all the beddable women. And every time you fucked them, you got a collectible card. So, how's that not more gratuitous? And also, don't ever insult my Witcher 3. And then, look at this, the Rogerer in question even has a girlfriend who is pregnant. Way to shit on a sister, Abby. Kind of feel that's like some of that reverse sexism shit going on there. Why does she have to she's not the one in the relationship. Why does she have to deny herself? How's she portraying womankind? By getting laid by someone she wants to get laid by? I thought women's sexual liberation was empowering. I don't know. Can't keep up. Let me know in the comments when this goes up on YouTube. So, it wraps it up. "It's basically Pac-Man with gratuitous boobs," I said to my eldest, who sighs and pours herself a large cup of coffee. "This will be another long discussion. Please don't write about it, Dominik." Afterwards. Just ridiculous. How can you come that late to a discussion about a game, bring nothing to the table, and also, not only do you bring nothing to the table, you have the worst understanding of both games, it seems, out of anyone who's ever played them alive today. It's staggering. Shocking.